Man in Gray here with another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is The Mezzanine, the debut novel by Nicholson Baker, which was published by Random House in 1988. It's 135 pages. The year after The Mezzanine came out, there was a television show, sitcom, that it bears some resemblance, at least in format, to The Mezzanine, and that was the show Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld's now iconic television show. When Seinfeld first debuted, hardly anybody watched it, but it slowly built up an audience because it was so different. It was promoted as a show about nothing. And in the early seasons, at least, that was at least partially true. I mean, there were some episodes, one famous episode where Jerry and his friends spend the entire 30 minutes of the show standing in line in a Chinese restaurant, trying to get into a Chinese restaurant. There was another episode where they wander around a mall parking lot for the entire episode, trying to find Kramer's car. And one of my favorite episodes is one where about half the episode, they are witnessing an argument between two drivers over a parking space. One's trying to pull in frontwise, and the other one's trying to back in, and they go into a long discussion about which is the proper way to park a car, going in frontwise or backing in, and that's a debate people still have to this day. Well, if Seinfeld was a show about nothing, The Mezzanine is a novel about nothing. The plot can be described pretty simply. There's a guy named Howie, who's a young guy who works in a large office building on the ground floor. And it's about 1 o'clock. It's almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And he looks down and notices that one of his shoelaces is untied. And so he bends down to tie the shoelace, and as he's doing that, 3 coworkers are leaving to go to lunch, and they wave to him, and he hollers at them, but he's distracted, and he pulls up, because they've gone by, he gets distracted, and he pulls up too hard on the shoelace, and he breaks the shoelace. So then he has to tie an emergency knot to kind of keep his shoe on. And the same thing had happened to him the day before. The other shoelace had broken the day before, and he sits there and he thinks about how odd that is, because why don't shoelaces break at the same time? If you tie them on the same, you tie the shoelace the same number of times, you take the same number of steps, why do they break in different time periods? So since it's close to lunch, he decides to go get replacement shoelaces and get lunch at the same time. So he goes out to leave the office, but he's stopped by a secretary who wants him to sign a get well poster for a fellow employee who's out sick because he hurt his back trying to move an above ground swimming pool. So Howie signs the poster, and while he's signing the poster, he talks to the secretary about his shoelaces and how odd it is that they broke on consecutive days. And then the secretary tells a similar story about smoke detectors, where one of their smoke detectors, she and her husband woke up in the middle of the night because the smoke detector went off. And so her husband replaces the battery in it. And the next day, as she's getting ready to leave for work, the same thing happens again with the other smoke detector. Why didn't the batteries both die at the same time? So two matching stories there. While the secretary is telling Howie the story, he notices her stapler and notices how streamlined it is. And this brings on memories of how objects like locomotives and staplers and various things became streamlined instead of boxy and with hard edges in the 1950s and 60s. So he meditates on staplers for a little bit. He goes out of the office and gets on an escalator going up to the mezzanine. He's on the ground floor. And while he's riding the escalator, he thinks a lot about escalators and how they work and his childhood experiences on an escalator. And when he gets to the top, he goes to a CVS pharmacy because the secretary told him that they had shoelaces there. So he goes to the CVS pharmacy and he buys a pair of shoelaces. And then he decides to get lunch. And he gets kind of an unusual lunch. He gets a hot dog, a bag of popcorn, a cookie, and a carton of milk. And when he sees the carton of milk, he thinks about when he was a kid and milk was delivered door to door in glass bottles. And so he starts thinking about the difference, but how things have changed. There used to be glass bottles for milk, and then you turn them in for a deposit each week at the end of each week, and now they're in cardboard. And he puts a straw in the milk, and that leads him to a long discussion about straws, where when he was a kid, straws were made out of paper, and you had to drink pretty quickly because the paper would start to dissolve. But plastic straws have their own problem because they float. And when people first started putting plastic straws in soft drinks, they would float. You'd have to hold it down with your hand while holding the cup with your other hand until someone came up with the idea of a lid with a hole in it that would hold the straw in place. So there's a long discussion about straws. While he's eating lunch, he pulls out a paperback copy of Meditations by the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, and he starts reading that and thinking about ancient Rome. When he finishes, he goes up to the goes to the down escalator, and while he's riding the escalator, he thinks about the custodian whose job it is to polish the rails on the escalator and what a good job he does. And then that leads him to thinking about how the custodians have to put trash bag liners in all the trash cans in all these offices in this building, and the technique they have to develop in order to do this efficiently. And then he thinks about how the carpet, these offices all have carpet in them. And he thinks about in the old days when offices had wooden floors instead of carpeting, how much noisier it must have been. And eventually he gets back to his office. And that's the end of the novel. That's the whole novel. He breaks his shoelace, he goes to lunch, and he comes back. And as you can tell, the bulk of this book is a stream of conscious monologue about what he's thinking during this time period. Now, the other thing, the kicker about this is as the narrator is writing down this book, he's adding footnotes to his adventure. And the footnotes are almost as long as the actual book itself. There are dozens of footnotes. Some of them take an entire page, and they're footnotes about things like doorknobs and coat hangers and glass milk bottles and the little paper circles that went in milk bottles and things like that. And the very last footnote is 3 or 4 pages long, and it's a footnote about the nature of footnotes. Okay, so what the heck is going on here? What is this? And when this book first came out, it really divided people into 2 camps. There were people that said, this is hilarious, what a brilliant book. And there's other people that said, how on earth could you write a book, even a 135-page novel, about something so trivial? What a waste of time. Well, what's really going on here is it's a parody of James Joyce's Ulysses. Except instead of wandering around Dublin and thinking about love, sex, death, and the nature of existence, Hallie is thinking about straws, staplers, doorknobs, coat hangers, everyday escalators, things like that. It's a book that focuses on the minutia of life. And one of the points that Baker's making is that stream of consciousness novels like Ulysses or Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse or some of William Faulkner's books, they're really false. Most people's day-to-day thoughts aren't the way they're portrayed in these novels. Most people's day-to-day thoughts are things like, where did I put my keys? Do I need to stop and get gas on the way to work? Or do I have enough to get back? What time is my doctor's appointment next week? That's what people spend the bulk of their conscious waking hours thinking about, is everyday things. Or what's the name of that song I just heard? Or who's the singer? Thing like that. And so this book is filled with these little trivial things because that's what people tend to spend most of their time thinking about. So if you're doing a real, true stream of consciousness novel, the vast majority of it would be trivial material. And this book, I think, has had an influence on stream of consciousness novels. I did a review a while back on Ducks Newburyport, the 1,000-page stream of consciousness novel by Lucy Ellman. And probably at least half of that novel is about trivial things like, in that novel, the character is a baker. She's making pies in her kitchen. And a big part of the novel is she's thinking about what kind of pie she needs to make or what stuff she needs to order for her pantry. She's watching a television show. She's watching old movies while she makes pies, and she thinks about the movies and the actors and everything. And so about at least half the plot, half the book doesn't have anything to do with the main plot of that novel. So another influence I think that Baker had was probably on David Foster Wallace. The extensive use of footnotes in this book is something that Wallace also did in his 1,000-page novel Infinite Jest. There's literally hundreds of footnotes in Infinite Jest, and most of the footnotes have very little, if anything, to do with the actual book. And so I think he may have been influenced by Baker's Mezzanine book. So, as I said, when this book came out, it was very, I won't say controversial, but it split opinions. There were some people who thought the book was silly and a waste of time. There's other people that praised it for Baker's brilliant use of language and his wicked sense of humor. The fact that you got this young, intelligent guy who's working in an office who all he thinks about are straws and coat hangers and stuff. So anyway, if you're looking for a novel that's different, it's the novel that's funny. There's no deaths, there's no explosions, there's no divorces or anything in here. No angst. If you're looking for something that's funny and light and easy to read, I mean, it's 135 pages. It won't take that long to read. And very innovative. Baker followed this up with another book that's kind of similar to this, in which a guy gets up in the morning and takes a rolled up newspaper and puts it in his fireplace and lights it to get the fire going. And then he sits down and he writes everything that's going through his mind while this newspaper is burning. And he stops as soon as the newspaper is through burning. And so it's a series of little short chapters about this guy's thoughts while he's watching the fireplace get started. And so he did a whole series of little stream of consciousness novels like that at the early part of his career. So if this book sounds like something you'd be interested in, you might want to pick up The Mezzanine by Nicholson Baker. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.